Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Saturday morning show. Today, we're going to talk about too close for comfort, and in particular, really, should you be renting to your family and your friends? This is a wee bit an interesting subject. I think if you're a self-managed landlord or you're an agent dealing with putting tenants in place for landlords, this is a big question because it can cause a lot of frictions between landlords, and landlords think it'll be a lot easier to put people they know into properties, but it isn't always the case. And we have learnt that firsthand, Kerin, between landlords and family members and friends and things, and trying to mediate between. So there is a lot of pitfalls there and things that people don't take into consideration and think it's going to be a different scenario than whether it was Joe Bloggs being the tenant as opposed to somebody they know. They think it's going to be an easier process, and sometimes it works out a lot worse.
Yes, I think we've seen some cases anyway over our time. People think it's going to be a good idea, and I mean, to be fair, sometimes it is. But
Yeah.
I think probably on chance we've seen it not work out more than it has worked out. So it'll be good to see kind of both the pros and cons to it in today's show.
Yeah, there is of course scenarios where it works out fine, and that is that's great. But there's things you need to think about, and renting your property to somebody close to you or someone that you know might feel like that easy win. You can maybe dispense the marketing side of it, and all these view-ins and skip all that tiresome paperwork and background checks. But really, these are the things that I think are really, for us as agents, we understand the importance of all this and that whole process. And just kind of take a minute and probably pause when you're thinking about that. Renting to a family or close friends, does it indeed have its upsides? You really need to think it through. But it also brings in its own unique challenges as well. So it's wise to kind of weigh up, like you said, Kerin, the pros and the cons before diving right in. So whoever rents your property, whether it's a friend, whether it's a relative, or whether it's a complete and utter stranger, they all have the same rights within the property, and every landlord has the same responsibilities. So it's vital not to put yourself at risk and being overly accommodating just because possibly you know the person that's going in. So it's a bit like having a wee bit of an angel on your shoulders and a devil on the other side. Every advantage has a potential pitfall, and we are going to try and explore them as best we can in this morning's show. So we're going to look at what you could do right, what you could do wrong, the risks of relaxing the rules just because it's maybe somebody you know, where boundaries can be blurred, especially if it's family and friends, and saying yes with confidence is so important. To be able to say yes to and agreeing to a tenant and pure confidence that things are going to pan out okay. If you're saying yes to somebody and you're like, we're not too sure, then that's a big red flag. Definitely straight off. So renting to somebody close can work out beautifully for some people, but not everyone. But without the right foundations, even the best relationships, whether it's your really close friend or whether it's your immediate family, it can come to blows when you involve a rental property. So here's hopefully everything that you need to know to ensure that never happens. And we're going to kick off today and talk about everything that can go right. And Kerin, you're going to lead us in today with all of the things that can go right in the situation of renting to family or friends or somebody close.
Yeah, so we'll start off on a positive note here. So we'll start off with the good news for it. So renting to friends or family can offer a smoother experience with feelings of confidence and certainty on both sides. Yeah. When handled with care and clarity, there's many upsides that it can have as well. So we'll have a little look at them. So obviously, if it's somebody that you know, you can have a long-standing trust in somebody whose character that you know as well. Mm-hmm. You've probably also seen where they live and have an advanced insight into how they take care of their home. So for me, this is quite a big one.
I was just going to say, Kerin, let's elaborate on that because that is a really big point.
Yeah, and I mean, you could have some friends that you could go into and be like, I would not rent to you. Just everybody lives very differently. And I think when we do this job, obviously we see quite a wide span of that. But obviously when it's your personal property and maybe you've not got as much experience of that, it can maybe be as a little bit of a shock to you as to how different people live. And ultimately, as long as that property isn't being damaged and the rent's being paid, they can leave dishes, they can leave things lying around. That's completely up to them if that's how they choose to live. But on the flip side, again, if you've got a tenant that, a friend, for example, that you think would be a really good tenant, they look after their property, they keep it nice and clean, that can be an advantage to you there.
Yeah, I think even as in my years as being a letting agent and things, and you'll agree with me here, Kerin, as well, when you've got a lot of new blood coming in and new people as agents and younger people, they are quite surprised when the reality of how other people live becomes apparent to them, because a lot of people don't understand, because you're not in a lot of other people's houses on a day-to-day basis. This job you are, and you get to see people live very differently, and that's not always maybe that they're damaging and not looking after the property, just the way people live, and you have to live and let live in a certain to a certain aspect. And it's quite surprising to some people how other people do live.
Yes, it takes a lot to surprise us these days, we'll say that. But at the same time, we have a lot of tenants that have their properties and they're kept like a show home, and it's great. So it can be a good insight to knowing how somebody's been living previously in a property, whether that's been another rental they've been in, or they've been in an owned home and they're now having to go into a rental property. Like I say, it's a good insight if you've seen how your friend or family member lives previously.
Yeah.
As well as that, we have social accountability beyond the tenancy agreement. So nobody wants to be known as the friend or relative who let you down, trashed your property, or failed to pay the rent. So again, you've got that side there, just that social relationship. Nobody wants to be known as that person. Some people unfortunately end up known as that person, but there is that, hopefully, that pretense of that's not how they want the tenancy to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, a close personal relationship may allow you to make more significant improvements to your property during the tenancy and with regular tenant, and keep your income with a steady flow as well. So again, if you've got that person there that you've got the good relationship with, you can have that bit more flexibility, maybe a bit wanting to do some more home improvements in there as well, which means that they would stay longer and it keeps your rent coming in nice and stable as well, hopefully there.
Yeah, that's such an important part of it as well. And I think I'm going to go on to talk about it and things that could go wrong, but do you know that a lot more lax approach to rental payments and things with people, it's not going to work for you, especially if you're trying to do a buy-to-let portfolio as an investment for your retirement, or as another source of income and things. So.
Yeah, and so obviously when expectations are aligned, renting to somebody that you know can feel a safe and straightforward option, but that doesn't mean you should skip the formalities. And that is the key point in there. Make sure you still do everything right that you should do to make sure this good side is the experience that you get if that is the route that you go down.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a few bad sides, which I'm sure you'll cover for us.
Yeah, so you got to do everything that could go, the things that could go right, and I'll get to do the things that could go wrong. So yeah, I mean, family and friends they're some of life's joys, to have really good friends and really good family. But even with the best intentions, personal relationships can complicate tenancies from landlords and a tenant side. It's on both sides of the fence here. Some examples that I've encountered over the years, and I'm sure you have to as well, Kerin, is that expectancy to be quite lenient around paying the rent, especially paying the rent on time. If there's a reason it's going to be late, but it becomes and then once it's been allowed once, it then tends to become a recurring theme. And like you say, you've no structure to the rental payments. They're either late or they're less amount, and they're in 2 or 3 parts, and I've seen it all, and it just doesn't work. And sometimes relatives do feel like they don't need to prioritize it quite as much as maybe a regular tenant would, because they feel that there's no risk of being evicted or penalised or chased up about it, really. And that's where then the faults lie. And the rental payments are up there with the most important things, because that is the thing that needs to be in place in order for the tenancy to function, the property to be able to pay for itself in terms of future repairs and be a viable investment if it's part of a portfolio and things as well. It's so important. And there is an expectation of leniency when it comes to people that are close to you. And then on the flip side as well, from the landlord's side, the landlord could sometimes be a bit slower in fixing things, or what they actually consider as something that's urgent to be taken care of. And that's a surefire way to annoy even the closest friend or family member. If they're in a property and there's something that needs fixed and it's just been brushed to the side because it's not seen as urgent or as important, then that could cause frictions between these people and their relationship, no matter how close it is. And trust me, I have seen it happen, definitely. So it can end up that way. And then I think as well, possibly throughout, if it's inspections or at the end when they leave, if there's damage and things, there could be a lot of awkwardness around that. How do you approach that situation and do that properly, and then point out where maybe they've damaged the property or not looked after it properly? If it's throughout the property, throughout the tenancy and the property is inspected, or do you know if there's neighbours reporting noise or nuisance? Do you know, giving someone a bit of a telling off can feel really uncomfortable. And if you're self-managing and you don't have an agent in place to do that for you, that could be quite an uncomfortable situation to deal with. But it's something that's necessary to be done in any tenancy, whether they're family, friends, or a complete stranger, as we said. So, do you know, people might think, well, what's the answer to that? I want to be able to rent to family and friends and things. It's to be able to have a proper chat with that person, whether it is a family member or a friend who wants to rent your property, and agree on how the tenancy should be treated right from the beginning. Set that agenda from the outset with complete respect for each other and avoid testing each other's limits throughout. I think if you're quite clear at the beginning and do set that agenda, and we try and do that with tenants as well, like this is what you're expected of, this is what is expected of you as a tenant, this is what we'll do as your agent. And then at least from the beginning, it's like, right, okay, if this happens, the agent will step in, and in certain situations, this is what I need to do first before I speak to the agent and things. If you've got that clear and transparent say at the beginning, then you will set the groundwork and the foundations for a more easy and smooth tenancy, as they say.
And these conversations can be quite awkward, even when it's not a friend or a family member. Like if you are a self-managed landlord, it's not a pleasant conversation to have quite often. So it could be made even more awkward when it is somebody that you know, just to say, look, you've caused this damage, or the rent's not been paid on time. So it can be, I don't fancy the job of self-managed landlords, even being in that situation themselves. For us, it's what we do. It's second nature. We know how to handle these things. But obviously for maybe a landlord self-managing on their own, it might be a lot more uncomfortable for them to have those conversations, especially if it's somebody that they know.
Do you know what's quite frustrating, and we've had it in the past, and it's when a landlord does use an agent and we're in place, but it is a family or a friend that's in the property, and we are obviously then advising, right, this is what needs to be done here in terms of certain actions or things to be done, and the landlord with hope that tries to hold us back from doing that because of this, like, oh, I don't want you going to them and saying this, and it's like, but we have to do that. Obviously, when it comes to a safety aspect and things, certain things, we will insist that things need to be done. But if it's just generally picking people up on things about maybe how the property's been kept or how the garden's been kept, things, and they'll hold us back from doing that because they feel awkward us doing it on their behalf. And it's really, you should because that's why we're the third party and try and be impartial, leave them impartial, and we do the enforcing. But yeah, we've had that in the past, and it just causes big problems.
Yeah, if we're there, just need to let us do what we need to do in those situations. Ultimately, we are here as an agent to protect the landlord's property and their investment in it. So that's obviously the steps that we take are with an effort to do that and protect the tenant as well. Obviously, you get some landlords that maybe don't always act in the best interest. So it's good to have that third party involved to play maybe devil's advocate in that situation to keep things balanced and keep the property as it should be.
Yeah. And then you mentioned, and you're going to go on to talk about now, about obviously the risks and not following the rules and being too relaxed. It could leave a landlord in hot water. So, I mean, run us through that. What are the risks of relaxing the rules, basically?
Yes, so it might be tempting and even feel nice to rent your property to a friend or relative and avoid the rigmarole and paperwork that goes with setting up a tenancy. Obviously, we know how much goes involved in that first place for it, but if you cut corners, then it's only really yourself that ends up in the hot water for it. So obviously you probably don't know everything about your friend or relative's credit score, salary, financial commitments, or money management. So avoid cutting corners with the referencing process can leave you in hot water for it. So regardless of if it's somebody that you know, still carry out that referencing process. It is going to be key for the setup for your tenancy. And it still sets that professional aspect to the start of it as well, as opposed to just being like, here's the keys, on you go. You still have that professional first impression for it. So hopefully that's then what continues throughout the tenancy as well, regardless of if it's a friend or family.
It's setting the tone, basically, yeah.
Yeah. Friends and family are susceptible to anyone else's personal problems. So again, they could get health issues, relationship breakups. So don't skip out taking rent protection insurance in case they can't pay. So again, we never know what the future is going to hold with somebody. They could become ill, not able to work, not able to pay the rent. And that again leaves you in a situation which is not ideal for yourself. So at least if you do have that rent protection there for it, and make sure you still have your landlord's insurance in place, and that is what's going to be your safeguard here for it.
Yeah.
And this is one that I have seen landlords try to do, despite us advising them very much against it. But waiving the deposit out of trust leaves you unnecessarily exposed to all future costs and damages, while taking on the casual basis and failing to protect it leaves you open to penalties. So if you choose not to take a deposit for them, it's just, again, yourself that's going to have to foot the bill at the end when they move out if there is any damages. Even getting a cleaner in can be expensive. So making sure that you have a deposit in, you have an inventory done as well. Regardless, it's still going to be your protection there. And one of the keys there is if you are self-managing, to make sure your deposit is banked in a deposit protection scheme, because you can get a big hefty fine if you don't.
Yeah, I think it's up to minimum three times the amount of the rent you get charged for not banking deposit. This is an interesting one, because when it comes to landlords who are with family and friends and things, and they're like, oh, don't need to do a credit check on you, and no, it's fine, you don't need to give me a deposit up front, I trust you. And then even things like putting the proper rent guarantees in place, or your proper insurances. I mean, you should have landlord insurance anyway, regardless. But I think, like you said, like the rent guarantee things, they might not want to do that because they might think, oh, the tenant, well, not the tenant would know it was in place. But do you know, they might do it, and it's a quite lax approach, because they think, right, well, I trust them. I don't want them to think that I don't trust them and take a deposit and all the rest of it. But it's not. It's just part of the process, and it safeguards you for any eventuality, because as you say, and by no fault of the tenant, they may lose their job. You know, their company that they work for could go into administration, and they could be sat unexpectedly without a job, and then having to claim benefits and things for a short time until they find employment. And there's so much different scenarios that is not putting your friendship or your trust in your family member or things into question. It's just safeguarding yourself for situations that could happen to anybody, not just this person individually. And without that, and especially the deposit, I mean, at least at the bare minimum, have a deposit and have it banked in the deposit scheme. To waive that at the beginning is just a big risk to take, and no one should do that.
Yeah. So, and as with any business, it's best to remove as many avoidable risks as you can in the case the worst does actually happen. So there's every chance it won't, but if it does, it doesn't need to be entirely at your expense.
Yeah, no, and that's the beauty of having these things in place. And it's definitely a big risk being so laxed with the rules that you would apply to anybody else that was going into a property. And I think if you're self-managing, but possibly you've got an agent that's putting things in place for you, they will advise you of all this. So please listen to the advice of an agent. If they're even if they're just doing a let-only service for you and you're looking after the tenant wants to go in, even if it's a family member or a friend, let the agent do the proper checks and go through that process. And if by whatever means it doesn't pan out and they don't actually reference up or have the credibility to go into the property in terms of financial aspect or whatever else, then you might want to reconsider, even though it is somebody close to you, because you will feel the penalty of that in terms of a financial loss at some point, probably further and probably emotionally as well further down the line. So is it all worth it just for a few checks to have them in place properly? Definitely.
And like you say, if those checks aren't working out, don't take the risk. You could easily find there's so many good tenants out there that are looking for properties. So you could easily find somebody that will be a suitable tenant for you. But if there are red flags there, then listen to them.
Yeah. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to talk about, obviously, like the boundaries and where the boundaries can be blurred. And we've all heard of that, the adage, never mix business and pleasure. And there's a lot of truth in that, especially when it comes to buy-to-let and letting property. It doesn't always apply to renting with family and friends, but there are some potential pitfalls to think about when your tenant is someone that even just someone that you know. They don't have to be a close friend or family, but if you know someone, it could still open up that possibility for the boundaries to start being blurred. Do you know, the expectation of, do you know, mates rates, do you know, and it's like, oh, I'll get it for mates rates because I know this person. When it comes to possibly the rent, whether it's right from the start and continually through the tenancy, do you know, if you do that for the get-go, then it's going to be an expectation throughout, because you've not set that agenda at the beginning, like this is the way it is, and this is how things are going to go. Or you may feel guilty about raising your rent from the current levels as well. Do you know what? Throughout, and this is a big thing now, obviously we're looking at rent controls, so rent increases are a big thing on a lot of landlords' minds at the moment. I was looking at stats the other day, and I think it's like, it used to be, it's a very low percentage. It was something like 3 or 6% or something. The landlords used to do rent increases, and now it's like 68% of landlords do rent increases continually, and we could do that every 12 months now. Obviously pending the rent cuts and things. But do you know what? The rent is something that is not to be blurred between conversations, even if you know the person, because as soon as you let them do that from the beginning, they'll expect it throughout. And this mate rates thing is not a good investment strategy. So that's one thing to think about. And if there's a disagreement between you and the person who's in the property, as I say, friend, relative, or someone you know, your dispute can it could spill out and into your social life, into your family life. Do you know, leaving others around you wondering, do you know, maybe what side to take? Who's in the right here? Especially if it's close family and friends. If you're in a group of friends, or do you know, a close family, obviously close knit family group, it could cause really like ruptions between that. And if there's a disagreement, it will more than likely spill out into that group. So do you want all that hassle in your life? Definitely not. So that's something to think about as well, because that's when boundaries are definitely blurred and could upset. Do you know, you can't keep things just professional now. It's also in your personal life, and you don't want those things bleeding together and in a fractious way like that. Definitely not. And then again, I think one of the most important things, and I've seen this happen in the past, if it comes to the situation where you do need to evict, the eviction process will be a lot harder. And you know, if you're taking legal action against someone that you care about or somebody that you're emotionally connected to, it could be exhausting, because, like I say, it's going to be a 24-hour thing, and it could involve a lot of other people, and it's all too easy just to avoid it until possibly it's too late, and then you leave yourself with a really hard situation to try and resolve. And all of this could be a really heavy strain on possibly quite cherished personal relationships if it's family. So I would strongly recommend that you acknowledge these with each other up front and ensure that you're both comfortable about how things are going to proceed. And that's what I say, obviously, from the beginning of the tenancy, if you're going to have close people in your tenancy, and if it's going to be coming to the point where maybe you need to sell the property, maybe you need to, you know, for whatever reason, serve them a notice to leave, be very transparent and upfront and nip that in the bud very quickly and explain the reasons why, and assist them in that process as well. And that should make for the smoothest possible process in that situation as possible.
Yeah, and like you say, if you're going to have to be moving back into that property or selling it, then obviously it can be a little bit of an uncomfortable one, especially if you've had somebody in for a while, or even in the first place as well. If they were expecting to be there longer than they're getting to be there, it can be quite an uncomfortable conversation. So being clear of things. But one of the main things we can talk about.
But I was just going to say that as well. I think if it's not, and I keep referring to possibly like buy-to-let portfolios and building a portfolio of things. It may be that you have one property and maybe you inherited it, and maybe you become an accidental landlord and you've got this property, and it might be the easy option to let to a friend or let to a family member, and that's totally fine. But just be really clear with them at the beginning. You could take this tenancy and you could live here, but in the near future, whether that be a year, possibly 2 years, possibly 3 to 5 years, I am going to have to sell it, or I'm going to move back into it and use it as my home. So when so just make them aware, like that time will come around, and I'll have to ask you to move on so I could move in or I could sell it. But in the meantime, I'm happy for you to be the tenant, and this is how it's going to work. And you know, so a conversation like that, where they're both like, okay, right, we're on the same page here. In a year or two, I'll expect you probably to come back to me. So I'll work into my plans that I need to move on. And then if you get to that point, it's not going to be an awkward conversation like, I kind of need my property back now. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like that, and this unexpected thing, because you've not laid out the groundwork at the beginning.
Yes, like you say, just being clear from the outset can save a lot of hassle further down the line, or uncomfortable conversations.
Save a lot of stress.
Yes. But ultimately, we want landlords to be able to say yes with confidence. So renting to someone you know, it can be beneficial for everyone when everything's set up clearly and correctly from the start. So, which is obviously what we've touched on there. But before you hand on over the keys, there's a few steps that you should take and things you should make sure are done. So set the initial rent and future reviews just as you would with regular tenants, and avoid using the tenancy on the expectation of financial favours. So we've talked about that, mates rates, who do not want to be doing that. Make sure you set it out quite clearly. Creating the tenancy like any other, with thorough referencing, a watertight rental agreement, and a photo-backed inventory to protect your security deposit. So again, we've talked about this, making sure you get the inventory done, just because you think, even if you've seen their house and the way they live and you think everything will be fine, still get an inventory done, because without one, you don't have a claim, and it's part of the private residential tenancy that you should have an inventory for it as well.
We were just exploring this. Was it last week? I think we're talking about. Well, you mentioned about watertight rental agreements here. So obviously, if you're watching in England and Wales, you will have a lot more ability to edit and change and use different versions of tenancy agreements. Make sure you have the right clauses in there to safeguard yourself, your landlord as the landlord, and the tenant as well on each side. Here in Scotland, we have the private residential tenancy, which we can add slightly in things, but basically the basis of that is set out by the Scottish Government, and within that is the need to have a inventory or a condition report. And you mentioned there, Kerin, about a photo's been in a photo-backed inventory, and photos being involved in that. I don't think they need to be, as long as there's some form of inventory. But I think the more comprehensive it is, the better it safeguards, and not just you, the landlord, definitely the tenant as well. If I was a tenant and moving in, I would like quite a comprehensive inventory or condition report to go through and sign off, so that we both are in agreement. This is how the property was handed over.
Yeah, they're very much key there, as you say, protecting both the tenant and the landlord. So communication as well is obviously one of the key things here. So setting up, for example, a WhatsApp group for your property to keep the communication about the property in a dedicated place. So that way things won't get overlooked in general chit chat or social arrangements. I mean, you could have a group chat, that things get blurred into there, or when you're speaking to them just in a social setting, again, things can get brought up. So at least if you have that dedicated place for it, there's no overlooking things in there. It's quite clearly in black and white and communication there, and that's a set place and the expectation for it as well.
That's a really good point, actually. And if you're self-managed and you've got family or friends or whatever in a property, then you will have, we've all got group chats. God, I've lost track of how many group chats I've got between family and friends and all the rest of it. But yeah, if you have just a dedicated WhatsApp's amazing. Voice notes, documents, pictures, you can share everything on there. And if you've just got that dedicated for that tenancy or for the property, where you can talk between each other and share things solely about the property and the tenancy, that kind of compartmentalizes that in one place and doesn't let it bleed into your social aspect or your family aspect of things and conversations. So that's a really good point. And again, a great use of WhatsApp. I'm a big fan of using WhatsApp in today's world.
Like you say, you can send through various mediums as well. So like if the tenant's having some issues, you can quite easily ask them for pictures of it, and they can just send them through there. But finally, you don't rule out using a managing agent. Finding the tenant is just the start, and having someone on your side to ensure you continue the legal compliance and managing challenges of moments can be a major boon as well. So it's key there as well. Like we say, obviously, even if you are self-managing with somebody that you know, that it can be a full-time job. It is for us. So we have quite a lot of properties, but it just means even if you've got somebody in there, it saves you having those awkward conversations if you have a managing agent. And as well of that is it keeps your property compliant. It means that you're not having to keep up to date as much with your property safety certificates, and when they're due for renewal, if you've got an agent in place, they'll deal with that as well. And if your tenant is behind on paying the rent, again, managing agent is the one that deals with that uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, I mean, there's a lot of seasoned landlords out there who look after their own properties and things. But I think even in that initial stage, to make sure that it's getting done right, if you're unsure, a good agent will always help you set up things properly and make sure that you've got all the right certificates in place, the right paperwork in place, the right referencing has been done, you know, the checks have been done, and all that leading up to the tenant moving in. I mean, like you say, if you've got several properties and it's becoming like another, I mean, it will be another job to you. I know it will be, even if you've got a handful of properties. Do you know, it might be useful to use a local agent who is experienced in what they're doing and have them on your side, definitely. So I think hopefully we've covered quite a lot of the the good side and the bad side of renting to family or friends or someone close. I mean, renting to someone you know isn't always automatically a bad idea. And you know, like I say, with proper setup and support, it can be quite a rewarding and reassuring process. So approach it like a business deal, even if it's wrapped up with a lot of personal ties. Do you know? And if you're a landlord and you're looking for that ideal setup, and you know, where you've got that rigorous referencing and you know, these bulletproof inventories, and you know, feel free, reach out to us, or if you're not in our area, look up your local agent that you've got that's got quite good reviews and reputation, and speak to them, and they should be able to assist you in the best way they can, so that you are not going to fall foul to these things that can go wrong. Because it doesn't have to be, as long as things are done right and you don't lax the rules and kind of, you know, like you say, do the mates rates things and waive the actual responsibilities that you would have if it was a complete stranger.
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to both sides there. So I think we've covered a fair few. So I think it's down to people to kind of make that right judgment and make sure that they are. Ultimately, it's an investment, it's an important one, and it's a pricey one if you don't do things right.
Yeah. So too close for comfort, as it always doesn't have to be. I think speak to the right people is probably my best bit of advice. Thanks for all your insights this morning, Kerin. That was really good. If anybody's got any questions, I see there's some coming in here. I'll jump on and answer them. But if you're watching on the rerun, you could always jump in the comments. If you want to read the blog and things that goes with that, it's on the website. And we will be back not next Saturday, the Saturday after, for the next Letting show. And we will see you all then. Thanks for watching, guys, and thanks for joining, Kerin.
You're welcome. See you later.